Hello, I'm here to present on whether or not Jackson Pollock's pieces reflected the same feelings towards World War II. My name is Jacob Snell. So a little bit of background for this is there's three main things that you should know: the abstract expressionist movement, World War II, and Jackson Pollock himself. The abstract expressionist movement was a movement created for people to express how they felt, how they were inspired, what was going on around them without using sound and structural context. They did this through different types of mediums and paintings such as gestural painting or color theory, and some key figures were Mark Rothko, Franz Klein, and Jackson Pollock himself. The next thing that you should know is about World War II. World War II was a big turning point and influential event that happened throughout the whole entire world's history. World War II, in regards to my research, I'm going to be specifically looking at the American societal feelings that were provoked by World War II, and then I'm going to apply that to my methodology. Then finally, Jackson Pollock is a key influential figure in regards to the abstract expressionist movement. He was a painter who used throwing paints, hard strokes, and other techniques to convey a message on canvas through oil. So for my literature review, I have 5 main things. My first will go over color and emotion. My second will go over value and emotion. My third will go over line structure and how different people have interpreted it. My fourth will be the societal feelings of World War II through a literary analysis. And then my final will be Jackson Pollock and World War II itself. So for my first source, Kaya and Epps performed a participant psychological study in which they used 98 college students to derive meanings behind 13 colors. These colors were 5 basic colors, 5 intermediate colors, and 3 chromatic colors. The basic colors were red, blue, yellow, orange, and purple. The intermediate were red, yellow, yellow, blue, blue, orange, etc. And then the 3 chromatic are also known as black, white, and gray. What they found from this is that certain colors such as red, blue, and the primary colors that usually have more of a brighter tone to them are more so associated with positive emotions, whereas darker colored tones are more associated with negatives. For example, black is associated with death, and gray is associated with unease. However, white is the odd one out, and it's actually associated with peace and calamity. The second source I looked at was value and emotion. Value is how bright something is. It's how dark or light a certain color can get or a certain piece can get. The 2 people that looked into this were Chris J. Boyatzis and Varghese. And they utilized children and they associated that with color and each having a different value to it. And what they found was as colors went from lighter to darker, they grew inside of negative emotion. For my third source, I was examining line structure, in which Charles Spence utilized line structure in specific faces to determine whether or not different lines conveyed a different emotion. He utilized 3 primary line sources, which were straight, convex, and concave, each of which portrayed a different meaning. So straight ones varied inside of meaning. However, the primary meaning that came about was directionality and senses of anger, whereas concavity was associated mainly with depression and sadness, and convex with joy and happiness. So for the societal feelings, Jonathan Jones did a literature review on multiple different pieces of literature and examined how how the public reacted to it and what this meant in regards to emotion. What he found was that the societal feelings towards World War II are primarily negative. with the two leading emotions being anger and depression. The last source I used was Jackson Pollock and World War II, in which Katie Robinson Edwards used an analysis of social responses towards Jackson Pollock's pieces to figure out what his values and morals were. And what she found from this was that Pollock truly opposed war and capitalism. So a little bit of background. My problem statement is, how have these people reflected and expressed themselves during uncertainty? How can we apply this to different things? How can we find this out? So the way that I found this out was through my solution, which is examining a key influential figure and how he portrayed his emotions during this troubling time. Hence, I got Jackson Pollock. So then I'm going to do an examination of Pollock's pieces and compare them with the emotions of World War II. So for my methodology, I chose a content analysis in which I will examine two of Jackson Pollock's pieces, She-Wolf and War. She-Wolf is an oil painting created in 1943, and War is a colored pencil drawing also created in 1943. She-Wolf has the narrative behind Romulus and Remus, and War has the narrative behind, as you could guess, World War II. So this is She-Wolf, and for my methodology, I applied a 7x11 grid onto She-Wolf. From there, I'm going to examine what colors are within each square and what value is portrayed within each square, and then see how much of that makes up the piece. I did the same exact thing here for War. I applied, except this time I applied a 7x10 grid, and then I eliminated any negative space, which are squares that do not have any part of the main subject matter, as I'm trying to only look at the main subject. And then in regards to line structure, I looked at each square and then chose whichever type of line was the most primary or predominant line within each square. So on to my results. For the color aspect of She-Wolf, the primary 4 colors were black, white, red, and yellow. Black was found within 76 out of the 77 squares. And black conveys a very negative emotion. It conveys the emotion of death. Whereas white was found inside of 61 of the squares, and that conveys a very positive emotion. It's peace, calamity, almost hope. And then you have your red and yellow, which are both primary colors and both portray a positive emotion. Although red can be associated with negative emotions, such as blood and fighting, it's also associated with a lot of positive emotions such as love and romance. Inside of Kaya and Epps' experiment and methodology, they found that red was more associated with positive emotions, thus I'm going to count it as a positive emotion. Now for War, the 3 main colors were once again black, white, and then this time it had gray. All 3 of which are chromatic colors, and each of them have a specific meaning towards them. Black, once again, very negative, conveying death and unease. And then white, the exact opposite, peace, calamity. But then gray is where it gets interesting. Gray is actually the most negative out of all of them, according to Kaya and Epps. Inside of their research, they found that gray was associated most by all the 98 college students as an uneasy feeling. So what does this mean? Well, it means that She-Wolf primarily is positive, okay? And War is primarily negative. Specifically, as you look here, you have your primary colors here, and whether or not and how much they link and correlate, and then what emotion that sort of prevails. Now, in regards to value, for value, each square has to be examined independently and determine whether or not it is one of the 3 values, dark, medium, or light. So inside of She-Wolf, there were 35 of the 77 were dark, 25 were medium, and 17 were light. Thus, She-Wolf is mostly negative as well. And in War, it was 22 were dark, and 22 were also light. However, the leading thing that really changed it up was the medium value, which, as shown here, by having majority dark and medium, She-Wolf is absolutely negative, whereas over here in War, by having equally dark and light, those two sort of cancel out each other, leaving us with medium, and 29% of that is medium, so thus it is still negative as shown by Boersi's and Verghese methodology and experiment. Furthermore, this is connected to how the feelings of World War II sort of came about, as World War II elicited negative emotions such as anger and unease. Finally, for line structure, in regards to She-Wolf, I did a very similar thing to value. I examined each square individually and what line it was primarily composed, what type of line it was primarily composed of. The leading being concave lines, with 34 of them, making up around 44% of the piece, which elicited sort of a feeling of sadness and almost pity. Straight being the next, which majority were V-shaped straight lines, which as shown inside of Spence's findings, those are associated with anger. And then finally, least was convex, with only 16 of the examined squares, leading to around 20.8% of the whole piece. In regards to War, 30 of these were straight, so primarily a angry tone underlying within the piece itself. Then next, concave, once again, creating feelings of melancholy and sadness, and then least was convex. So what does this mean? Well, it mainly means that both She-Wolf and War elicit negative emotions, just like the societal feelings towards World War II. These emotions, although are primarily angry, they also have feelings of sadness and sort of pity, right? However, they do have a connection between the two. Now, for my limitations, I was limited in my software and methodology in two aspects. First, with my software, I wanted to utilize a different one. I ended up using atlas.ti, a content analysis software that allows you to edit art pieces. However, I wanted to use a software that was out of my budget, and that would have been able to examine the piece as a whole and take out how much of the piece was actually made by a certain color or a certain type of line. Furthermore, giving more accurate and concise data. However, pricing, once again, out of my budget. Thus, I was able to improvise by utilizing squares to capture how much of the piece was made up by a certain element. However, it does not fully and accurately portray the amount of the piece that was represented by said element. So, in conclusion, there was not a correlation between She-Wolf and War with color. There was one with value, and there was one with line structure. And because there was no correlation between the color, it was not able to be linked to World War II and the emotions elicited then. Although War might have elicited those emotions, She-Wolf did not. However, both in value and line structure, we can say that the emotions portrayed and invoked by She-Wolf and War through value and line structure can be connected to the emotions of anger and desperation of the societal feelings of World War II. However, due to the one situation between color, the overall linkage is not quite there. So why might this be? And I think the reason why this might be is because of different narratives. So here inside of War, it is a clear and concise meaning behind World War II. It has a definitive meaning. It's how he feels about the war. Whereas here inside of She-Wolf, it's about Romulus and Remus, a Roman myth that was how Rome came about to be. Both convey two very different stories, and thus have quite a high chance of being the reason why you cannot directly link this to the emotions conveyed by societal World War II America. So for the future studies, I want to examine the amount of color and value that would make up each piece and how much of a line structure and shape would do that. Specifically, like let's say for example, you could look at just all the red inside of the piece, and then the software takes that up and out and it says this is how much of that, this is how much red is contained within the piece. The next thing that I could and would want to do is utilize different interpretations of each category as shown by my literature review, which I use to derive meaning behind lines, shapes, color, and value. I would like to see different interpretations, whether that be in different age groups or in different, just different participants in general. And then finally, another thing that we could do is compare different artists, see if their narratives are alike, if they use the same mediums, or whether or not they utilize a different type of way of expression, color theory versus gestural abstraction or something like that.
Terrific, thanks Joe. I have a few questions for you and then we'll wrap up. So for the first one, how did your initial exploration of the scholarly work at the very beginning of the year lead you to your final research question? Tell us how that story unfolded.
Yeah, so originally when I was looking at some scholarly work, some literature reviews, I was like, wow, this is really intriguing, how they're able to associate colors to emotions through a participant study. And I was thinking, well, why don't I do that, right? Create a survey. But then I'm like, how about I actually apply this? How can I see and how can we examine different periods of time and different influential figures by applying other meanings behind color, shapes, and lines? Terrific. So that's how I ended up with my research question of linking Jackson Pollock's pieces to the societal feelings of World War II America.
Excellent, excellent. A follow-up to that is, how do your specific findings provide direction for additional research? You talked about what you might do differently, but what other research studies can be run based on what you have found out?
Yeah, so based off of what I have found out, other resources that, other research studies that can be found and used is comparing these to different historical time events, comparing to different artists once again, but then also by seeing how I presented my methodology and examined each color and line shape, you're able to take those aspects and apply it to not only abstract pieces of art, but to other pieces of narratives and things that might convey a meaning that does not have a direct saying, I speak this is my narrative.
Perfect. And then here's the final question. If you could revisit your entire process from beginning all the way up through the presentation, is there anything you would do differently and why?
Yeah, so I would, instead of choosing 2 art pieces, I would instead take an art piece and maybe a news account or a historical document during that time and then do a content analysis between the 2 of them and see if anything links up that way, rather than utilizing emotions and seeing the difference between the emotions inside of World War II and then linking that with both She-Wolf and War and then linking up those 2. Instead, I want to do a direct linkage between one art piece and a historical account.
Terrific. Thanks, Jade. You are